been so challenging, like being active and playing 4 games and then not, and like not feeling the best, and then like frustrated of like how hard I worked in the off season, and then like all I do is rehab and like continue to do this process, and just like trying to trust that the best I can. And obviously there's really frustrating days. I'm there like 4 hours early. Like it's just hard. It makes for long days. And I'm not saying I would change that for the world, but it's just a lot at times. And then you're doing that for however many games. And I think that's been like the hardest part, has just been like the stop and go of everything. Like, and also like with the type of injuries that I've dealt with, it's not like 6 weeks. All right, you're coming back for the Connecticut Sun game on August
all about how you
30th
feel in the moment.
or whatever. It's like, how do you feel? Like
the podcast opens with an intimacy that feels rare in pro sports. No bright lights, no press conference formality. Just Sue Bird sitting across from Caitlin Clark and asking the kind of questions only another elite guard can get away with. You can hear it in Clark's first few words. She exhales, hesitates, then admits the hardest part of her season hasn't been the physical pain itself. It's been the stop-and-go rhythm of trying to play through it. One day her body feels fine, the next it's a question mark, and that uncertainty eats at her.
I've never really dealt with injury, and that's probably been a challenge in itself, because like when I first like was feeling pain, like I didn't understand it. Like I didn't know. I was like, am I just tight? Like, am I just getting old? Do I need to hit a stretch? Do I need to get like a little rubbed out? Do I need some icy hot? Like what's going on here?
She talks about the internal tug of war, how she hates the idea of being seen as soft, but also has to respect signals from a body that's never been through something like this before. It's not just a matter of missing games. It's the frustration of not knowing how much she'll have in the tank when she wakes up. That unpredictability makes everything harder, from game prep to mental focus.
I don't want to be soft. Like, you're like, am I actually, like, do I actually feel something? Do I not? Blah, blah, blah.
Clark pulls back the curtain on a part of pro basketball most fans never think about. On return from injury days, she's at the arena hours before tip-off, going through treatment, mobility work, and warm-ups that feel like their own mini-marathon before the actual game even starts. The result? What's already a long day for a healthy player turns into a grind that can drain her before the first whistle.
Like when I'm coming back from injury, and like when I've been back a few times this year, like the time I have to get to the arena to like prepare myself and prepare my body, just because of like the things I've gone through to this point, and just making sure I'm ready and doing everything I can. Like,
still, there's a layer of intentionality to how she handles it. She explains that when she's sidelined, she tries to give something back, spending more time signing autographs, talking to fans, and making sure they still feel that connection. Those interactions, she says, are more than just PR. They can flip her mood and remind her why the fight to get back matters. You can hear the shift in her voice as she describes a kid smiling ear to ear after meeting her.
You know, I still want to make as much time as I can for people, and, you know, give them something that they can remember. And, you know, I think that's also been really good for me too, is like when I do go out before games and like sign autographs and like see all the young kids or fans or whoever's come to the games, like it just like gives me a really good perspective on everything, and maybe gives me a little bit of motivation, and just being thankful for everything that I have. Like, and very thankful for like my fans and just the fans of the WNBA, of like how they can constantly continue to support and truly just want the best for me too at the end of the day. Like,
but she's honest. Patience is hard. Clark admits she's learning to give herself grace, to accept that she can't just will her body into peak shape overnight. She compares it to being thrown into the deep end without the gradual buildup of training camp. There's no easing back. Once you're in, it's full speed, and if you're not ready, the game will expose it instantly.
It's not like I have a training camp to like build up to like playing my first game again. It's like, no, like you're tossed into game 30. Like, go try to play well. Like, it's hard. Like, it really is. And I think it has given me really good perspective on like what a lot of my teammates and people that I've, you know, teams I've been a part of, like certain people have had to go through.
Sue Bird doesn't let the moment pass. She nudges Clark to talk about the mental part. What it feels like when the rhythm you've trained for your whole life gets disrupted. Clark answers in a way that's both vulnerable and revealing. She says she's had to accept that some days are about winning the battle, not the war. If that means playing fewer minutes to make sure she's available for the next game, then that's the call she has to make. The vulnerability is layered with competitive fire. She laughs lightly when she says she still expects herself to hit big shots, injury or not. But you can tell the smile is carrying weight, there's an undercurrent of frustration at having to adjust her expectations. She's not used to managing herself this way, but she's figuring it out on the fly. By the time this part of the conversation winds down, you realize you're hearing more than an injury update. You're hearing an athlete confronting a truth she can't outwork. The game moves at full speed, but recovery doesn't. And in that gap between the two, Caitlin Clark is learning who she is when she can't just rely on talent and toughness to push through. The conversation shifted on the podcast as Sue Bird leaned in, her voice calm but curious, inviting Caitlin Clark to go deeper into the unglamorous reality of playing hurt. Clark didn't hesitate long. She admitted there are days the body just doesn't respond the way it should, that you can prepare, eat right, and still wake up feeling like your legs are carrying bricks. Her expression softened as she spoke about those mornings after tough games, when every step down the stairs feels like a reminder of the price she's paying to compete at this level. She acknowledged that during the season, you don't have the luxury of full recovery. There's always another practice, another flight, another opponent. She explained how balancing rehab with the team's schedule means you're constantly negotiating between listening to your body and pushing through for the group. And while the word injury gets thrown around loosely, Clark made it clear this isn't about one dramatic moment. It's the accumulation of hits, falls, and strain that builds up over time until your game starts to shift without you realizing it. Her honesty landed heavily, especially when she spoke about the mental side. She said playing through pain forces you to think differently. You start reading the court not just for plays, but for ways to minimize risk. Sometimes that means pulling up for a jumper instead of driving hard into the lane. Sometimes it's deferring to a teammate in a moment where you would normally take over. She admitted that those choices can eat at you later, making you wonder if you're letting your competitive edge slip. Sophie Cunningham's earlier remarks came into focus in this context. Just days before the podcast, Sophie had spoken publicly about how fans and critics underestimate what Clark is pushing through. Without giving specifics, she defended her teammate against talk of slumps and adjustment struggles, hinting that there were physical challenges most people didn't know about. That solidarity made Clark's candor with Bird resonate even more. It was the first time the subtext became text, and fans could connect Sophie's fierce defense with the reality Clark was now confirming in her own words. Sue Bird guided the conversation with precision, asking how much of the challenge was physical versus mental. Clark didn't shy away. She said the mental weight is often heavier. When your body isn't 100%, your confidence can start to dip, and you feel like you're playing catch-up against the version of yourself you know you can be. She described watching game film and spotting moments where she hesitated, not because she didn't see the opening, but because she second-guessed if her body could execute without making the pain worse. She also touched on the frustration of how invisible certain injuries can be to outsiders. Fans see you on the floor and assume you're fine. Teammates know better, but even they can't always feel the full scope of what's happening inside your joints and muscles. That's why, Clark admitted, she's sometimes reluctant to talk openly about it. She doesn't want it to sound like an excuse. But on Bird's podcast, the walls came down. She allowed herself to explain that choosing when to speak and when to stay quiet is a balancing act of its own. It's about protecting your own mindset while also protecting your team's focus. This unfiltered insight wasn't just rare. It was a window into the private calculations an elite player makes every time she laces up. And for those listening closely, it tied together weeks of speculation with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. Diana Taurasi's remarks, made before the Sue Bird podcast dropped, had already stirred conversations across the league. Known for her blunt honesty, Taurasi didn't sugarcoat her thoughts when asked about Caitlin Clark's adaptation to the WNBA grind. She acknowledged Clark's talent outright, but warned that the WNBA season will expose every weakness, physically and mentally. Coming from a veteran with 2 decades of professional wear and tear, the statement carried weight, and for some, a thin layer of provocation. Taurasi's point wasn't just about rookies in general. She stressed that the physical demands of the league are relentless. No time for extended recovery, constant cross-country travel, and facing opponents who target you every night. She implied that surviving, let alone thriving, requires not just skill but durability and a mental approach sharpened by hardship, whether intended as motivation or a dose of reality. The timing was impossible to ignore when Clark's candid injury reflections followed days later. Sophie Cunningham's own defense of Clark added a different dimension. She didn't speak with the cool detachment of a veteran evaluating the next generation. She spoke like a teammate in the trenches. Cunningham made it clear that Clark wasn't getting a fair shake in the discourse, that people were quick to judge her shooting numbers or turnovers without factoring in the physical toll she was enduring. The contrast between Terasis's hardline truth and Cunningham's protective loyalty created a layered backdrop to Clark's podcast appearance. On Sue Bird's show, Clark indirectly responded to both. Without naming names, she confirmed that the physical reality was harsher than she'd anticipated. She admitted that some games had left her feeling like she was operating at 70% of her usual mobility. And while she never suggested she was unprepared for the challenge, she acknowledged that the grind forces you to rethink how you play and how you prepare. Bird nudged her to explore the mental consequences of that rethinking. Clark's answer was revealing. She said the mental strain isn't just about the pain. It's about constantly recalibrating your identity as a player. When you're known for a certain explosiveness, a certain way of attacking the rim or pushing the pace, and your body won't always let you do it, you're left asking yourself what version of you is showing up that night. The most striking moment came when Clark shared a recent game example. She didn't specify the opponent, but described a fourth-quarter possession where she saw a defensive gap she could normally exploit. She hesitated, not because she doubted her read, but because she knew the landing from that drive would send a shockwave through her leg that she might carry for the rest of the week. It was a decision rooted in preservation, but also one that haunted her after the game. Terasis's earlier comment, that the league will eat you alive if you can't adapt, echoed here. Clark even admitted that adaptation is her biggest focus now. She's experimenting with angles, quicker pull-ups, and different ways to create space that don't require the same pounding on her body. This wasn't defeatist talk. It was the sound of a player evolving in real time, refusing to let the grind break her, even if it means reinventing parts of her game. What made this stretch of the conversation stand out was how seamlessly Clark weaved the physical and mental together, illustrating that in the WNBA, one never exists without the other. And with Cunningham and Terasis's words fresh in listeners' minds, the podcast became not just a personal reveal, but an unintentional dialogue between three competitors whose careers are linked by the same unforgiving reality of professional basketball. Sue Bird, who's been through more than her share of injuries, didn't let Caitlin Clark skate past the emotional side of her story. She asked the question that cut straight through the polite surface. How does it feel to wake up and not trust your own body? Clark didn't rush her answer. She took a breath, looked down for a moment, and then said it was like having a piece of her identity constantly in question. She explained that she's always been the type to lead by doing, the player who takes the hit, finishes the play, and pops right back up. But now there are mornings when she wakes up stiff, when the first few steps out of bed remind her that she's not at 100%. Those moments, she said, don't just test her physically. They mess with her confidence in ways she didn't expect. Bird pressed further, pointing out that fans often assume a player is fine as long as they're still on the court. Clark agreed, saying that in reality, a lot of athletes are playing hurt more often than people know. The difference, she noted, is that in college, you might have a lighter travel schedule or the luxury of a few days between games to recover. In the WNBA, the pace is relentless. If you're not managing yourself properly, the season can pile up on you before you realize it. Then came one of the most vulnerable moments in the entire podcast. Clark admitting there are games where she's been out there smiling, celebrating, and competing, but deep down she's thinking about whether she'll be able to walk without limping the next day. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was a peek into the reality that the cameras don't capture. That reality is exactly why Sophie Cunningham's earlier defense hit so hard for fans. Sophie had said in a media scrum that people don't understand what she's fighting through every night, and hearing Clark's own words on Bird podcast confirmed it. The image of the rookie phenom lighting up the scoreboard is still true, but it exists alongside the image of her quietly pushing through pain just to keep showing up for her team. And Terasi's tough love warning, that the league will find your breaking point, came into sharper focus. Clark didn't push back on that sentiment. Instead, she acknowledged that the only way forward is to adapt, to become smarter about when to push and when to preserve. She even joked, with a wry smile, that maybe she'd have to take a page from veterans like Bird, who managed to play at a high level into their late 30s, not just because they were skilled, but because they mastered the art of survival. Bird, clearly connecting with the struggle, offered a piece of advice from her own career. You don't have to prove your toughness every play. Longevity is its own kind of toughness. Clark nodded at that, saying it's something she's trying to internalize, that protecting her body isn't weakness, it's the strategy that will keep her competing at the level she demands from herself. By the time the conversation wrapped, it wasn't just about injuries anymore. It was about identity, adaptation, and the quiet resilience it takes to keep going when your body and mind are both under pressure. The mix of Cunningham's loyalty, Terasi's challenge, and Bird's understanding turned Clark's candid reflections into one of the most layered and talked about moments of her career so far. Caitlin Clark's honesty in this conversation pulled back the curtain on a side of professional sports most fans rarely get to see. It wasn't just about the pain of an injury, it was about the emotional toll, the pressure to keep performing, and the courage it takes to admit you're still figuring it all out. Combined with Sophie Cunningham's fierce defense and Diana Taurasi's unflinching truth, it painted a full picture of the battles Clark is fighting both on and off the court. If you were moved by her vulnerability, intrigued by the behind-the-scenes dynamics, or just respect the grind it takes to stay at the top, make sure you like, share, and drop a comment with your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next big story in the WNBA.